Hello, everybody. My name is Emerson Holmes. I'm a partner of the International Arbitration Group at Hogan Lovells, and I'm head of the manufacturing and industrial sector. And today I have the pleasure of speaking with my colleague Stephanie Sung. And we're going to discuss over the next 15 or 20 minutes or so issues arising from critical minerals, with a particular focus on China and how China is approaching the issue of critical minerals. Now, of course, as we all know, critical minerals is in the news almost every day now. So, for example, I think there was a news article yesterday about the Pentagon investing in a plant in Tennessee that produces critical minerals. The UK government has recently announced a strategic review on its approach to critical minerals. And a couple of days ago, the EU announced that China has now started granting licenses to EU companies to provide them with critical minerals. So this is a very important topic. It's an important topic for our clients as well. So we thought it would be a good opportunity for Stephanie to provide us some insights from the China perspective. So Stephanie, why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit, and then we'll move on to some general introductory questions.
Thanks, Emerson, for having me. A little background about myself. I'm a trade regulatory attorney specializing in China and the US export control, sanctions, and customs matters. I have been with Hogan Lovells for about 10 years. And during this time, I observed a clear trend. So many multinational companies initially focused on US, EU, and UK export control issues. With China's implementation of its own export control regimes, this has increasingly drawn attention because many companies have either already been affected by these measures or are beginning to closely monitor these developments. So this makes our discussion today particularly timely.
Thanks for that, Stephanie. So why don't we kick off with, as I say, some general introductory questions? And the first one that I have is, well, what are critical minerals and why are they so important, particularly for the manufacturing industrial sector?
When we talk about critical minerals, it's not actually a legal term under Chinese laws. It's more about a practical labor. So basically, we are referring to minerals that are essential for modern industry. This group usually includes rare earth elements, rare earth metals like gallium and germanium, other strategic metals such as antimony, and the resources like graphite. Why are they called critical? Because they are absolutely vital for manufacturing and technology. So take rare earths, for example, they are often called the industry vitamins. You will find them everywhere in powerful magnets, high performance alloys, high performance engines, laser surgical tools, uh, also including weapons, drones, and aerospace. So they are key to sectors like electronics, electric vehicles, wind turbine, and the manufacturing sector. Similarly, graphite, gallium, germanium, tungsten are critical to semiconductor and battery production. They are the material input for 5G chips, optical devices, solar cells, and the display items. So in short, these minerals are the backbone of a lot of cutting edge technologies and also finished products we commonly use in our daily life.
It does seem, based upon what you said, that they are very much critical to all different sectors of our economy. So I suppose that really brings into focus, well, which countries are dominant in the production and processing of these critical minerals? We obviously know about China, we know about the US as well, but which other countries are dominant in this particular area?
I would say production and the processing of critical minerals are highly concentrated, and China is really at the center of it. So, according to the International Energy Agency, which is an international energy forum under OECD, for 19 out of 20 key strategic minerals, China is the leading refiner with an average market share of about 70%. And take rare earths as an example, China holds nearly half of the global reserves and produce around 60% of the mining output. But where China really dominates, as you said, is processing. About 91% of the global refining happens in China. And when it comes to rare earth magnets, which are essential for EV motors, wind turbines, and defense systems, China's share is roughly 94% of global production. Yeah. So while countries like Indonesia and Congo are also big in mining certain metals, China controls the refining and the manufacturing stages, so which are critical for turning raw materials into high-tech components.
That's very interesting because when I read articles about critical minerals and what countries are doing in order to harness their own critical minerals, I read articles about refining the critical minerals, but less so about processing. So I suppose countries need to be focusing on processing these critical minerals and not just extracting them. Um, Based upon what you're saying, is that a fair summary, Stephanie?
Yeah, I think for rare earths, if you want to extract the rare earth elements from raw material to more refined, more pure items, you need both refining and processing. And China is dominant in both ways.
And that's important, I suppose, for our particular sector, the manufacturing and industrial sector, because processing is obviously one of the key components of companies in that particular sector. So it'd be interesting to know which of our clients are doing the processing as well as the extraction. You've provided some statistics in terms of how much percentage of the market China has. Do you have a sense of how much percentage of the market, say, the US has, or maybe Australia has, in comparison to China?
I believe the statistics by those countries are relatively low or much lower than China.
Yeah.
And then that's why we also notice, the U.S. recently signed a series of rare earths and critical minerals agreements with Southeast Asia countries and Australia. I think that the purpose is, to diversify the supply chain related to rare earth sourcing and processing, so that they can reduce the U.S. dependence or other Western countries' reliance on China. But again, building processing capacity and achieving full independence from China will take years.
And could you just tell us, Stephanie, the agreements with Southeast Asian countries, which countries are they?
Primarily Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam, four countries.
And that is for the extraction of critical minerals or extraction and processing?
Some focus on both rare earth sourcing. It
Yeah.
also extends to refining partnership, and also I believe there are also processing elements involved in those agreements.
Wonderful. That's great to know, Stephanie. I suppose that in the next series of questions, I want to focus really on China and the approach of the Chinese government in relation to critical minerals. So, China has long treated critical minerals as a matter of national security priority, so not merely for commercial commodities. But why is that? Why is there seems to be this emphasis on national security?
That's a great question. Um, as you said, the rare earths or critical minerals are not just about business. They are very critical to a country's national security and also economic resilience. China sees it the same way. From what we have observed, China's Ministry of Commerce has consistently framed the critical minerals as strategic assets. Why? Because they are tied to national security, industry competitiveness, and the long-term economic development. Rare earths, for example, have what MOFCON calls dual-use characteristic. They are essential for civilian technologies like EVs and wind turbines, and also for military applications. So that makes them very sensitive resources. And then there's another layer, which is leverage. China's dominance in rare earths and processing technologies gives its bargaining power, especially in the context of trade tensions and also negotiation with US for the trade agreements. So when China imposes export controls, it's not just about resource management, it's also a strategic response to global geopolitical and economic dynamics.
Yeah, that's very interesting because I certainly recall reading a lot of reports in the international press about China using export
Yeah.
controls during the
Mm-hmm.
negotiations with the Trump administration. So it's interesting that you see the same thing. They're using it as a I was going to say a weapon, I suppose a bargaining chip in any negotiations. I suppose allied to that point is that over the last few years, China has, as I understand it, significantly tightened export controls on rare earths and other strategic minerals. Now, we heard a few days ago that China, that is, they started to relax or grant general licenses for certain materials or minerals to European countries. But can you briefly describe how China has gone about tightening export controls, particularly to the US, but also to Europe as well?
China's export control have evolved really quickly over the past few years. We have seen new laws and regulations rolled out, more items added to the controlled list, and much tougher enforcement, especially against unlawful exports of dual-use goods. There has been also a stronger coordination among enforcement agencies. Looking at the timeline, the first big step about the rare earth control came in August 2023 when China announced export controls on gallium and germanium. So this was a signal of what was coming. As background, gallium is used in compound semiconductors. It offers faster operating speeds, lower power consumption, and higher heat resistance. Germanium is heavily utilized in infrared optical instruments, fiber optic communications, and solar cells. And after that initial batch, controls then expanded to graphite, antimony, super hard materials, and also then to metals like tungsten and indium. So tungsten is extensively also used in semiconductor devices and cutting tools. Indium serves a critical material for LCD, touch panels, those stuff. And then in April 2025, China added rare earths such as samarium, terbium to the list, along with certain rare earth magnets. And this brought huge impact on electronics and EV industry. And these measures are still in effect today. Then the most recent wave came in October 2025. Everyone reads that in the newspaper, and it's really powerful. That's why U.S. cares that a lot, and why we
Yeah.
also heard the U.S.-China trade negotiations afterwards. Because this time, China did not just add a few more rare earth elements, it went further by imposing extraterritorial controls on items that incorporate Chinese origin rare earth elements. So, for example, if you have a EU-made rare earth magnets, if it incorporates more than 0.1% rare earth elements from China, then that entire EU-made rare earth magnets will be subject to Chinese export control. That's why a lot of the British and the EU companies are also heavily affected by these export control measures by China.
How does the Chinese authorities regulate or monitor whether a particular item of equipment reaches that threshold?
So the October 9th package also
Yeah,
controls certain rare earth refining and processing technologies and equipment, right?
yeah,
For equipment itself, it does not have the threshold like 0.1%. That
right.
threshold really focus on the rare earth magnets or targets. But if the equipment is used for refining and processing rare earth items, and then it will be subject to Chinese export control. And there's a specific list for that equipment. But now this October package has been suspended for a year through next November, which is as a part of the trade deal between U.S. and China after the trade negotiations. So in short, I would say it has been a steady tightening. starting with a few strategic metals and expanding to a much broader range of critical minerals and the related products. And when needed, China's approach on rare earth control could shift from targeted measures to a comprehensive framework that covers rare earth materials, technologies, and even downstream products.
I suppose based upon your summary there, which is incredibly helpful, Stephanie, you can understand why companies, certainly in inverted commas, the West, want to try and diversify away from China. Why there is so much effort to have agreements with countries in Southeast Asia, Australia, and obviously we talk about the rare earth or critical earth materials that are in Ukraine as well, and why countries want to get access to those. So, with all of that, Stephanie, what effects are you seeing of these controls in terms of supply chain disruptions?
China's export control, especially in these critical minerals, have definitely sent ripples through global supply chains. Um, when one country dominates, production and processing,
Mm.
any policy shift can create real uncertainty. What we are seeing now is a big push for diversification, right? Companies are scrambling to find alternative sources, investing in recycling technologies, and even looking at reshoring production to reduce risk. But here is the reality because China is so dominant, especially in refining and processing, building real resilience is going to take time. So I think the push for diversification is real, but it's a long-term gain.
How long do you think it would take to pivot away from China if that was a country or a business's approach? Are we talking like 2 years? Are we talking 5 years? Are we talking 10 years?
Definitely more than, 5 years. I think it's kind
Right.
of a
Okay.
range between 10 years. Um, you know, Back to the old time, I think why China develops its kind of refining and processing technologies. It also relates to environmental protection issues. I think if U.S. or other countries want to pick up this technology development right now, it also needs to a lot of environmental protection issues and other technology transfer issues. Though this is not a single issue that you can deal with or resolve within like a 2 year range, something like that. I think it's a long-term development project.
You've touched on this already, Stephanie, but I just wonder whether you could expand a little bit. You touched on the agreement, inverted commas, that had been reached by China and the US. I say inverted commas because you never quite know whether it could just blow up at any moment in time, given the trade negotiations between those two countries. But can you just describe in broad terms what that agreement includes?
I think the main amendments for following the trade negotiation, especially on the October export control measure package, is one, it revised the licensing policy for exports of dual-use items related to gallium, germanium, antimony, and super hard materials to the United States. These were originally introduced back in December 2024. And with this suspension, licensing for those items shifts from a presumption of denial to a standard review process. So similar to other destinations. So that's seeing a very positive step for U.S. companies. We have recently heard from our U.S. clients that their license applications are progressing with the MOFCOM. In addition, there are also news reports saying that China has begun designing a new rare earth licensing regime that is expected to lower the burden on license applicants and also allow higher volumes of shipments. And then the second is expanded a package of export controls um, that was pretty sweeping, as we mentioned. It covered additional rare earth elements, rare earth related technologies and equipment, super hard materials, lithium batteries, and even artificial graphite anode materials. So I think this certainly help companies to mapping its supply chain and be prepared when these measures come back again, probably next year. They would know how to deal with these kind of export control measures. So currently, this suspension will last for 1 year, so through next November. But I would say generally, U.S.-China relationship remains fragile. So if either side feels the other is not living up to its commitments, and these suspended controls could come back much sooner than November 2026. And we really recommend companies use this suspension period wisely to prepare their contingency plan, look for alternative supply chain resources.
And can they, I suppose, focusing on our clients and companies that rely upon these minerals from China, what do you advise them to do? You say obviously try and get other sources, other supply chains, but can they actually say buy lots and lots of these critical minerals from China and almost like stockpile them, or is
Mhm.
that not feasible given the licenses that are still required from the Chinese government?
It's certainly an option during this 1 year time frame. If your item sourced is not subject to Chinese export control, meaning you can get them without license requirement, right? And you can start procuring those items in a large volume from your Chinese suppliers. But if your item is subject to Chinese export control, I think with the current licensing policy, it's been a little bit relaxing compared to earlier. So I think it's also not a difficult issue to get those items, provided that you provided the necessary documents, you prepare the license application well with your business partners. Um, yeah, that's my view.
Yeah, that's very, very helpful, Stephanie. And thanks very much for your summary. Well, the takeaways that I'm certainly getting from this very helpful discussion is that this is very much a dynamic, fast-moving issue that could blow up at any moment in time. But at the moment, the waters seem to be calm, certainly as between Washington and Beijing, and hopefully that will continue for the foreseeable future because it seems as though if you're a business in this industry requiring these critical minerals, you really want stability and you don't want sudden shock waves happening, which means you have to pivot away from China because you might not be able to get any supplier of the minerals you need as a business. Thanks very much, Stephanie, for your time. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you for having me today. Thank you.